Hello and welcome. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to step away from the absolute chaos of the 24/7 news cycle. We're going to tune out the pundits and all the strategic analysis for a little while. Not to ignore what's happening in the world, but to try and understand it from a perspective that's, well, it's deeper, it's quieter, and it's thousands of years old. The topic is conflict, war, and hatred. And man, does it feel overwhelming right now. But we're going to look at it through a completely different lens, one that speaks directly to the crises we're all facing, both on the world stage and, believe it or not, in our own lives. Let's dive in. Peace cannot be bombed into existence. Just let that sink in for a second. That simple statement, it just cuts right through all the noise, doesn't it? I mean, you open any news app, you turn on the TV, and you're just hit with this wall of images and stories that is, frankly, it's exhausting. You see the flashes of airstrikes in the night sky, smoke rising from places that used to be homes, and the faces of people whose lives are just shattered. And underneath all of that tragedy, there's this unspoken promise, right? It's an assumption from leaders and generals that peace is something you can create with force. That if you just drop one more bomb or launch one more missile, you can somehow force people into being peaceful. But here's the thing. That's a promise that is never, ever kept. Because peace isn't what's left after destruction. It comes from understanding. And it feels like that's a truth we've all kind of forgotten.
You see, what we're witnessing across the globe, it's not really a bunch of separate, disconnected fights. It's more like a single, terrifying machine that's just escalating. It's a feedback loop of violence and retaliation that seems to have no off switch. It's like a self-perpetuating engine that just runs on suffering. Every single act of aggression, no matter how justified it might seem to the side doing it, it just plants the seeds for the next one. It creates this chain reaction that doesn't care about borders and echoes for generations. And it feels endless because, well, it's designed to be. It's designed to feed itself.
Okay, so let's break down how this cycle actually works. The pattern is it's brutal and it's tragically predictable. An attack on an embassy, a really symbolic act, is answered with a super precise, high-tech drone strike that's designed to show power without risking your own people. But that drone strike, which almost always has collateral damage, it's seen by the other side as a cowardly assassination. So that gets answered with a naval bombardment, a huge show of overwhelming force. And that in turn triggers a desperate barrage of missiles, which then unleashes an even more devastating retaliation. And here's the key. Every single person pulling the trigger frames their action as a response. We didn't start it, we're just reacting. But in reality, every reaction just becomes the next action, the next provocation. It's a perfect closed circuit of destruction.
And the logic that keeps this whole machine running is really revealing. Every nation, every leader giving the orders, they all claim they're fighting for something noble, for security, for justice, for their people. They use this very specific language, right? Words like deterrence, self-defense, restoring order. They tell their citizens that this next attack, this is the one that's finally going to work. Just one more show of superior firepower, and the enemy's will to fight will be broken. But the security never comes. The peace they promise is a mirage. Instead, the rubble just gets higher, the refugee camps get bigger, and the thirst for revenge in the hearts of the survivors, it becomes an unquenchable fire. The whole strategy is flawed from the very beginning because it's based on a total misunderstanding of what hatred actually is.
So, if our modern strategies of force and deterrence are failing so spectacularly, where in the world can we turn for a different point of view? Well, we're going to look at this whole crisis through a lens that's over 2,500 years old. It comes from a teacher who was born into a world that was just as violent as ours is today. The Buddha wasn't some mystic who lived in a cave. He was a prince, the son of a king. He lived in a time of constant war between rival kingdoms. So his teachings on conflict, they weren't just abstract philosophy. They were a practical, pragmatic response to the suffering he saw all around him. And he offered this really uncompromising truth about war, revenge, and the human mind. A truth that gives us a radical and pretty challenging alternative to the path we're on now.
Let's just sit with these words for a second. This is from the Dhammapada, one of the most respected ancient Buddhist texts. Hatred is never appeased by hatred. It is so direct, so absolute. And notice, there are no exceptions. There's no fine print for special circumstances or when they really deserve it. The Buddha isn't saying it's hard to stop hatred with more hatred. He's saying it's an impossibility. It has never, ever worked, and it never will. And then he gives the solution. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. That word alone is so critical, it shuts every other door. And then he drops the hammer with that last line, elevating this from good advice to a fundamental principle of reality. This is an eternal law.
To really get what's being said here, we have to understand what eternal law means. The original word in the Pali language is sanantano. This isn't a moral suggestion or some hopeful wish for how the world should be. The Buddha is describing a fundamental, unchangeable law of how reality works, as baked into the universe's gravity, right? You can argue with gravity all day long. You can stand on a roof and declare that it doesn't apply to you. But if you jump, the law will do its thing and you'll be broken against it. It's the exact same way with this law. You can try to defy it. You can insist that your hatred is justified and your violence is necessary. But the law of Sanatana will always win. The hatred won't go away, it will get worse, and the suffering will continue. You don't break the law breaks you.
So, to help us grasp this on a deeper, more visceral level, the Buddha often used these really powerful metaphors from nature. And for hatred, the most fitting and frankly terrifying metaphor he used was fire. Hatred acts just like a fire. It starts from a tiny spark, it needs fuel to keep burning, it spreads incredibly fast, and it consumes everything in its path. And, this is the crucial part, it often feeds on the very things you throw at it to try and stop it. Understanding this one metaphor is the key to seeing why our usual approach to conflict is doomed to fail.
Okay, picture a massive forest fire. It's raging, the smoke is choking you, the heat is intense, and all you want to do is put it out. Now, imagine someone runs up and hands you a big can of gasoline and says, "Here, throw this on it." You'd think they were completely insane, right? It's madness. And yet, that is a perfect description of how we as humans instinctively respond to conflict. When we're attacked, our deepest instinct is to hit back harder, to pour the gasoline of retaliation right onto the fire of hatred, somehow thinking it's going to put it out. But it can't. It's against the law. The gasoline will always and only make the fire bigger, hotter, and more out of control. And this fire, it doesn't just burn right here and now. It spreads across generations. Every retaliatory strike, every bombing run, every act of getting even, it doesn't just destroy buildings. It creates a new class of victims. It creates orphans who grow up not just without parents, but with a founding story of violent loss. It creates new widows, new grieving parents, new communities whose whole identity gets wrapped up in their trauma. And their pain, their burning sense of injustice, becomes the kindling for the next fire. The stories of their loss get passed down, making sure that the cycle doesn't just continue, it gets stronger, more bitter, and more vicious every time. Today's victims become tomorrow's fighters.
This is another one of those profound insights from the Buddha's direct observation of the world. There's really no such thing as a final victory in war. The whole idea of a war to end all wars is just a tragic fantasy. Why? Because the very act of winning a war by force guarantees that there will be another one. The victors might be celebrating in the streets, but at that exact same moment, their victory is breeding this deep, bitter hatred in the hearts of the people they defeated. And the defeated, as the quote says, they sleep in sorrow. But that sorrow doesn't stay sorrow forever. Over time, it curdles. It becomes resentment, grievance, and a burning thirst for vengeance that gets passed down to their children. The winner of today's battle just becomes the target of tomorrow's war. It's never really over.
Now, most of us aren't world leaders commanding armies, but this eternal law isn't just about geopolitics. In fact, its most important application is a lot closer to home. The source of all this conflict ultimately isn't in war rooms or on battlefields. The giant, terrifying global wars are just a large-scale reflection of the tiny wars happening inside each individual human heart. That very same fire that can burn down entire cities is the one we can allow to either smolder or to rage inside of ourselves. And it's only there, on that inner battlefield, that the cycle can actually be broken. So if hatred is the poison, what's the antidote? The Buddha called it Avera, which we translate as non-hatred. And it is absolutely critical that we understand what this means, because our culture has this all wrong. We mistake non-retaliation for weakness. We think it's about being a doormat. But Avera isn't passive at all. It's not apathy. It's the polar opposite. In this teaching, non-hatred is a state of supreme mental strength. It's the wisdom to see the cycle of suffering for what it is, and then having the incredible discipline to refuse to add your fuel to it. It's an active, powerful, and deeply courageous state of mind. Think about it this way. An enemy can destroy your home. They can destroy your cities. And those are terrible, tragic losses. But the ultimate defeat, the moment your enemy truly wins, happens on a completely different battlefield. It happens the moment you let their violence spark hatred in your own heart. At that point, they haven't just won on the physical plane, they have conquered your inner world. They've destroyed your peace of mind.
They've basically handed you the same poison they're drinking, and you willingly take it. They've dragged you down into the exact same state of suffering and delusion that they're in. So to guard your mind, to keep it free from that poison, that's the ultimate act of defiance. It's spiritual self-preservation.
This eternal law isn't just for analyzing the news, it's a diagnostic tool for our own hearts. So I want to invite you to apply it to your own experience. Just take a second and ask yourself, with real honesty, where is this destructive cycle showing up in my life? Where am I pouring gasoline on a fire, big or small, secretly hoping it'll just go out? We all do it. The pattern is universal. The key is to see it clearly, without judging ourselves. Now, it might not look like a global conflict, but the engine underneath is identical. Maybe it's a bitter feud with a family member, a cold war fought for years with sharp words and strategic silences, where every old hurt is kept perfectly preserved as ammo for the next fight. Or maybe it's a toxic rivalry at work, where you waste so much mental energy tracking a colleague's every move, secretly hoping they'll fail because they slighted you once. Or, let's be honest, for so many of us, the battlefield is social media, that endless, exhausting cycle of outrage and counter-outrage. Every time you feel that surge of righteous anger and you just have to get even, every time you fire off that perfect, scathing comment, you're not winning. You're just dropping a bomb on your own inner peace. So what's the alternative? If hitting back just adds more fuel to the fire, what on earth are we supposed to do? Well, the path that's offered here is radical. It's incredibly difficult, and it works counter to pretty much every instinct we have. But it is the only one that actually leads to freedom and peace. It requires a kind of courage that's much rarer and much more powerful than the courage to fight back. It is the courage to just stop. The courage to disappoint your own ego when it's screaming for vengeance. So how do we practice this kind of courage? The path has about 4 key steps. First, you just have to recognize the cycle for what it is. You have to see clearly that retaliation isn't a path to justice. It's just a suffering machine for everyone, including you. Second, you make a conscious, disciplined choice to refuse to participate. You see the weapon, a harsh word, a vengeful action, being offered to you, and you just let it fall. Third, and this is the hardest part, you have to be willing to absorb the blow. This doesn't mean you're weak. It means you are strong enough to take the hit of someone's anger without immediately passing that toxic energy along. You become a circuit breaker, not a conductor. And fourth, by doing all this, you starve the fire. If fire with no fuel burns out, hatred that's met with a firm, clear, non-hating presence, it just runs out of steam. This isn't being passive. It's a powerful spiritual strategy. See, peace doesn't arrive when they stop. It doesn't show up when the other person finally apologizes or when the world finally arranges itself just the way we like. Peace arrives the moment that you, as an individual, have the immense wisdom and courage to look at a conflict in your family, at your job, or just in your own head and declare, this ends right here. The cycle stops with me. It means stepping out of the ego's constant demand for fairness and stepping into the deep realization that you and the person you're angry with are both just trapped in the same painful game, and only you have the power to break your end of the chain. It's the ultimate act of taking responsibility for your own peace. So as we watch the difficult news of the day, as we see the devastation and feel that natural human compassion for everyone who's suffering, the great challenge isn't to let the world's hatred plant its seeds in our own hearts. The real work is internal. Guard your mind like it's the most precious thing you own. This means being mindful of what you're consuming, the conversations you're having, and the stories you're telling yourself. And practice non-hatred, not as some passive wish, but as an active, vigilant mental discipline. In a world of bombs and missiles and endless conflict, this internal strength, this resolute refusal to hate, is the only real, lasting defense we have. And that really brings us to the end here. The final takeaway isn't just a piece of ancient philosophy to think about. It's a personal call to action. Based on this eternal law, this unchangeable reality of how conflict works, just take an honest look at your own life, your own mind, your own relationships. Be kind to yourself, but be clear. What fire, big or small, will you make the courageous choice to stop feeding, starting today? Thanks for spending this time with me. May you be well, and may you find a way to be peaceful in a pretty turbulent world.